The intake officer at the prisoner of war camp in rural Georgia watched the transport truck pull up in the late afternoon heat of April 1945. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The war in Europe was days from ending, but the camps were still receiving prisoners from the final battles. Men who had fought until there was nothing left to fight for. The guards shouted orders in English, harsh syllables that meant nothing to the 40 German soldiers stumbling out of the truck bed. They blinked against the sudden light. Their uniforms were filthy. Their faces were hollow. They had crossed the Atlantic in the belly of a cargo ship, then spent 3 days on a rail car heading south. Most of them could barely stand. Then a boy appeared at the back of the truck. He was thin, pale as paper. When he tried to step down, his legs buckled. 2 guards caught him before he hit the dirt. They half carried, half dragged him toward the processing tent. The other prisoners watched him with dull eyes. They had seen men collapse before. It meant nothing anymore. The camp medic was summoned. He was a corporal named David Reed, 24 years old, from a farming town in Iowa. He had seen enough wounded men to know when something was wrong. This boy was not just exhausted. He was carrying something worse than fatigue. Reed ran his hands over the boy's torso. Standard examination. Checking for broken bones, checking for disease. His fingers pressed against the rib cage and stopped. He felt something hard beneath the skin. A lump that should not be there. He moved his hand 2 inches to the left and felt another one, then another. Reed looked up at the intake officer. His face had gone pale. This boy has metal inside him. The words hung in the hot Georgia air. The intake officer stared. The guard stared. The boy stared at nothing, his eyes unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Get Captain Mitchell," Reed said, "now." Captain Robert Mitchell arrived within 10 minutes. He was the camp's only doctor, a veteran surgeon who had worked in field hospitals from North Africa to France. He had removed shrapnel from hundreds of men. He had amputated limbs. He had watched boys die on operating tables because there was no blood, no morphine, no time. But he had never seen anything like this. Reed had already marked the locations on a clipboard. 5 scars, chest, back, shoulder. Mitchell's experienced hands moved quickly, confirming what Reed had found. Each site contained metal. Each piece had been there for months. He asked a question in broken German. His accent was terrible, but the boy understood. "When were you wounded?" The boy answered in even worse English. His voice was barely a whisper. "January." Mitchell did the math. January to April. 3 months. This boy had been carrying enemy metal inside him for more than 3 months. He had survived combat, capture, interrogation, transport across the Atlantic in a week in a holding facility, all with 5 pieces of shrapnel lodged in his body. Mitchell looked at the intake officer and said something that would echo through the camp for weeks. "This boy should be dead." The boy's name was Henry Walker. At least, that is what the intake clerk wrote on the paperwork after mishearing the German pronunciation 3 times. He was 19 years old. By the time the intake clerk wrote down his information, he weighed 108 pounds. He had weighed 130 before the war. He had been a soldier for less than 2 years and a prisoner for less than 2 weeks. But before all of that, he had been something else. He had been a son, a brother, a boy who wanted to build houses. The town where Henry grew up was small, one of 1,000 villages scattered across western Germany, where narrow streets wound between timber houses and church bells marked the hours. His father had been a carpenter. His mother, Margaret, taught school. His younger sister, Anna, was 16 and played piano better than anyone in 3 counties. They had been happy once. In the years before the war consumed everything. Henry remembered Christmas of 1942, the last Christmas when the family was whole. His father was still alive then, though his heart was failing. They gathered around the table in the small dining room. There was not much food, but there was enough. Margaret had made potato soup. Anna had saved sugar for weeks to bake cookies. After dinner, Anna sat at the piano. Her fingers moved across the keys like birds in flight. She played Brahms. She played Schumann. Henry stood by the window and watched snow fall outside. His father sat in his chair by the fire, eyes closed, listening. That moment felt like it would last forever. It lasted 3 months. Henry's father died in March 1943. Heart failure. There were no doctors left in the village. They were all at the front. Henry was 17. He became the man of the house. He worked as an apprentice carpenter, trying to learn his father's trade. He drew sketches of houses he would build someday. Clean lines, strong foundations, homes that would stand for 100 years. He promised his mother he would build her a new house after the war. Something beautiful, something that would replace all the things they had lost. Anna believed him. Margaret smiled and said nothing. She knew the war was not ending. She knew what was coming. The conscription notice arrived on Henry's 18th birthday, June 1944. He was to report for military service in 2 weeks. There was no choice. There was no exemption. The Reich needed soldiers. It needed bodies to throw into the collapsing front lines. Margaret packed his bag the night before he left. She did not cry. She placed his father's pocket watch in his hand. The watch had stopped working years ago, but she gave it to him anyway. "Keep this with you," she said. "Remember who you are." Anna did cry. She clung to him at the train station and refused to let go. He told her he would come back. He told her he would build that house. He told her everything would be fine. She did not believe him. The train carried him east, away from home, away from everything he knew. The military training lasted 8 weeks. It should have lasted 6 months, but there was no time. The Volksgrenadier divisions were being thrown together with whoever was left. Old men, boys, anyone who could hold a rifle. Henry learned to march. He learned to dig trenches. He learned to disassemble and reassemble a Carabiner 98K rifle. But he never learned to shoot it. Not during training. There were not enough bullets for practice. His unit was sent to the Western Front in December 1944, a defensive position near a small town whose name Henry never learned. The orders were simple and impossible. Hold the line. Do not retreat. There was no air support, no artillery, barely enough ammunition for one firefight. Henry had never fired his rifle in anger until the morning of January 14th. The American tanks appeared on the ridge to the east just after dawn. Henry and his squad were ordered to dig in and prepare for an assault. They had no anti-tank weapons. They had no reinforcements. They had no chance. The bombardment began at 6 in the morning. The shells came in waves, walking across the frozen fields, smashing into the German positions. Henry pressed himself into the bottom of his foxhole and prayed. He did not pray to God. He prayed to his mother. He prayed to Anna. He prayed to anyone who might be listening. The shell that nearly killed him landed 5 meters away. The explosion lifted Henry off the ground. For one impossible moment, he hung in the air, weightless, silent. Then gravity slammed him back down into the frozen dirt. He could not hear anything except a high-pitched ringing that filled his skull. He tried to move. Sharp pain exploded across his chest, his back, his shoulder. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his uniform. Dark, wet, too much blood. He did not know how many pieces of metal had entered his body. He only knew that he was still breathing, and that he needed to get out of that foxhole before the next shell hit. He crawled, 20 meters through snow and mud, dragging his rifle behind him because he could not let go of it, because letting go meant surrender, meant death. There was a drainage ditch at the edge of the field. 2 other soldiers were already there. One was dead, the other was dying. The dying soldier looked at Henry and shook his head. The message was clear. You are not going to make it. Henry lay in that ditch for 6 hours. The bombardment continued. The American tanks rolled forward. His unit ceased to exist. By nightfall, he was alone with 2 corpses and 5 pieces of shrapnel buried in his body. But he was still breathing. Images of home pulled him through the darkness. Anna's face at the train station, his mother's last embrace, the drawings of houses he had hidden under his bed. Those memories kept him alive when everything else said he should die. The next morning, a German medic found him. The medic was old, 50 at least. His hands shook as he examined Henry. The examination lasted 30 seconds. The medic checked for arterial bleeding. None. He checked for collapsed lungs. None. The shrapnel had missed every vital organ by centimeters. The wounds were painful but not immediately fatal. The medic wrapped Henry in a dirty bandage. He gave him a canteen of water. He pointed west and told him to walk 3 kilometers to the regimental assembly point. Henry asked about surgery. The medic laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a tired laugh, the laugh of a man who had seen too much. There is no surgery. There is no hospital. If you can walk, you walk. So Henry walked. He walked for 2 days. Through snow, through abandoned villages, sleeping in barns when he could find them, drinking from frozen streams, eating nothing. The pain was constant. Every step sent metal grinding against bone, against muscle, against nerve. He could feel the fragments moving inside him, shifting, cutting. He thought about lying down in the snow and not getting up. It would be easy, peaceful. The cold would take him in minutes, but then his mind would conjure the village, the piano music on Christmas Eve, his father's workshop, and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Everything he might lose if he gave up. He kept walking. The assembly point was chaos. The regiment no longer existed as a functioning unit. There were scattered squads, leaderless men, desperate boys trying to avoid American patrols. Henry attached himself to a group of 7 soldiers. None of them had a plan. They just kept moving west, away from the front, away from the sounds of artillery. On January 23rd, 9 days after Henry was wounded, his group stumbled into an American checkpoint. They were exhausted, starving, unarmed. They surrendered without a fight. The American soldiers searched them, took their papers, loaded them onto a truck. Henry was now a prisoner of war. He still had 5 pieces of shrapnel in his body. He still had not seen a doctor. He did not know if he ever would. The holding camp in France was a sprawling facility near Cherbourg. 5,000 German prisoners waiting for ships to take them across the Atlantic. Henry spent 2 weeks there. He received a medical inspection that lasted 5 minutes. The American medic asked if he had any injuries. Henry lifted his shirt and pointed to the scars, 5 small marks scattered across his torso. The medic shrugged. He marked Henry as ambulatory, able to walk, able to work. That was the end of the examination. Nobody asked what the scars meant. Nobody cared. The ship that took Henry across the Atlantic was a converted cargo vessel. 80 men per compartment below deck. The air was thick and hot. The smell was unbearable. Men vomited from seasickness. Others developed dysentery and could not make it to the latrines in time. Henry spent most of the voyage lying on his bunk, trying not to move. Every movement sent the shrapnel fragments grinding deeper, cutting fresh wounds inside him. He was certain he would die in that compartment, surrounded by strangers, thousands of miles from home. His body would be thrown overboard. No name, no grave. No one would ever know what happened to him. Margaret would wait by the window forever. Anna would play piano for ghosts. The crossing took 12 days. Henry lost 10 pounds. When the ship docked in New York, he could barely stand. He was loaded onto a train with 200 other prisoners and sent south. The train journey took 3 days. Henry remembered almost nothing from that trip, just the sound of the wheels on the tracks. Clack, 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 clack. The rhythm of inevitability. The sound of a life running out, and the constant grinding pain in his shoulder, like someone had buried a knife in the muscle and was twisting it slowly, endlessly. When the train finally stopped and the doors opened, Henry stepped out into the Georgia heat. His legs gave out. Corporal Reed caught him before he hit the ground. That is when the medal was discovered. That is when Captain Mitchell was called. That is when Henry's story stopped being just another prisoner transport and became something else. Something that would force the camp to confront questions it did not want to answer. Mitchell examined Henry in the processing tent while the other prisoners were led away to their barracks. He palpated each site carefully, checking for signs of infection, checking for internal damage. The wounds had healed on the surface, but underneath the metal was still there, still cutting, still waiting to cause the infection that would kill this boy. Mitchell called an emergency meeting with Colonel James Harris, the camp commander. Harris was 52, a career officer who had run prisoner camps in 3 states. He believed in rules, in efficiency, in not wasting resources. "He needs surgery," Mitchell said. Harris looked at the file. German, 19 years old, Wehrmacht infantry, low priority. "He's a prisoner of war, Captain. Save the morphine for our boys. The Geneva Convention requires us to provide equal medical care." "Don't lecture me about Geneva, Captain. I know the rules. I also know we have limited supplies, limited staff, limited time." Mitchell did not back down. "If we let this boy die from an infection we could have prevented, we're no better than the people we're fighting." The room went silent. Harris stared at Mitchell. Mitchell stared back. Finally, Harris spoke. You have 48 hours. Do the surgery. But this sets a precedent, Captain. I hope you understand that. Mitchell understood. He also did not care. The surgery was scheduled for the morning of April 21st. Henry was told through a translator, a German-speaking prisoner who worked in the camp administration office. Henry asked two questions. Will it hurt? Will I survive? The translator did not lie. Yes, it will hurt. Probably you will survive. Henry nodded. He had no other options. No other hope. He was taken to the camp hospital and given a bed in the corner of the ward. He did not sleep. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of other men breathing, coughing, dreaming. His mind drifted to the village, to the piano music, to his father's calloused hands shaping wood into something beautiful, to everything he might lose tomorrow. He reached into his pocket and felt the broken watch, the watch that had stopped keeping time 3 years ago. The watch that was the last thing his father had given him. He held it in his hand and made a decision. He would survive this. He would see them again. He would go home. The alternative was unthinkable, so he refused to think it. At 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally dragged him under. He slept for 4 hours, dreamless, empty. When Corporal Reed woke him at 7, sun was already climbing over the Georgia pines. The air smelled like heat and dust and possibility. Captain Mitchell was waiting in the surgical tent. His instruments were laid out on a metal tray. Scalpels, forceps, clamps, bandages. Henry walked in on his own feet. He lay down on the table without being asked. He knew what came next. Mitchell stood over him and spoke in that broken German. You will feel pressure, not sharp pain, but pressure. Do you understand? Henry understood. He had felt worse. If the pain is too much, tell me. We will stop. Henry shook his head. Do not stop. Get them all out. Mitchell looked at the boy, 19 years old, 108 pounds, 5 pieces of shrapnel, 3 months of suffering. All right, Mitchell said. Let's begin. The news spread through the camp before sunset. An American doctor was going to operate on a German prisoner, waste morphine on the enemy, waste time on a boy who had been trying to kill Americans just 3 months ago. In the enlisted men's canteen that evening, the conversation turned ugly. Sergeant Frank Brennan sat at a corner table nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was 28 years old, from Boston. His hands were scarred from years of factory work before the war. Those same hands had buried his older brother in a temporary grave on Omaha Beach 2 summers ago. The brother who had taught him to throw a baseball. The brother who had promised to come home. A private at the next table was talking too loud, saying how the doc was going to save some kraut kid, saying it was the right thing to do, the Christian thing. Brennan's jaw tightened. My brother died on that beach, he said. His voice was quiet, dangerous. He bled out in the sand waiting for a medic who never came. No German doctor saved him. The private went silent. Everyone in the canteen went silent. That kid didn't kill your brother, Sarge, someone said. Brennan stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. They're all the same, every last one of them. They put on that uniform. They followed those orders. They're Nazis. The war's almost over, another voice said. No point in more dying. The war's not over until every last one of them pays. Brennan walked out. The door slammed behind him. The canteen stayed silent for a long time after. The next morning, Colonel Harris called Captain Mitchell into his office. The colonel's desk was covered with reports, supply requisitions, disciplinary actions, transfer requests. Running a camp of 2,000 prisoners generated endless paperwork. I'm getting complaints, Captain. Mitchell stood at attention. About the surgery, sir. The men don't like it. They think you are wasting resources. We're bound by international law to provide medical care. Harris leaned back in his chair. I know what Geneva says. I also know what keeps this camp running. Order, discipline, the belief that we're the good guys. You start doing favors for prisoners, that belief starts to crack. It's not a favor, sir. It's medical necessity. Those fragments will cause infection. That infection will kill him. We can prevent it. Or we can let nature take its course. He'll be repatriated in a few months anyway. Mitchell did not blink. If he lives that long, that's not our problem. With respect, sir, it is exactly our problem. We hold these men. We're responsible for them. If we let this boy die from something we could have prevented, we become the enemy we're fighting. Harris stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, prisoners were moving between barracks, working in the fields, living, waiting. You're setting a precedent, Harris said. Other prisoners will expect the same treatment. We don't have the supplies. We don't have the staff. Then we'll make do. You're willing to stake your career on this? Yes, sir. Harris turned around. He studied Mitchell's face, looking for doubt, finding none. 48 hours, Captain. Do your surgery. But when this causes problems, and it will, you'll handle them. Understood, sir. Mitchell left the office. He had won the argument. But winning and being right were not always the same thing. That afternoon, Sergeant Brennan found Otto Schneider in the prisoner work detail. Schneider was 35, a former Wehrmacht officer. He had lost his rank when the Americans captured him, but he had not lost his authority. The other prisoners still followed him, still looked to him for leadership. Brennan pulled him aside, away from the guards. You know about the surgery tomorrow, Brennan said. Schneider nodded. Word traveled fast among the prisoners. That boy is making you all look weak, Brennan continued. Crying in front of Americans, taking their charity. Schneider's face hardened. He shames us. Your people should handle this, internally. Schneider understood. The Americans could not touch Henry without consequences, but prisoners policing their own was different, expected even. After the surgery, Schneider said, when he's weak, an accident in the barracks, a fall, the wounds get infected. Brennan said nothing. He did not need to. The seed was planted. He walked away. His conscience told him this was wrong. His grief told him it was justice. He listened to his grief. That evening, Corporal David Reed came to check on Henry. The boy was lying on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He had not eaten much, had not spoken much. Reed took his blood pressure, his pulse. Everything was elevated. Fear did that. You okay, kid? Reed asked. Henry did not understand all the English words, but he understood the tone. Concern, kindness. Why you help me? Henry asked. His accent was thick, his grammar broken. Reed paused. He had not expected the question. Because you're 19, Reed finally said. Same age as my kid brother. He's back home in Iowa, working the farm. War's almost over. No point in more dying. Henry absorbed this. He wanted to say thank you, wanted to say he was grateful. But the English words would not come. Reed seemed to understand anyway. He brought a bowl of chicken soup. Real chicken. Not the watered-down broth the prisoners usually got. Eat, Reed said. You need strength for tomorrow. Henry ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. It was the first proper meal he had eaten in 4 months. His stomach had shrunk. After 6 spoonfuls, he felt full. But he kept eating, because Reed had brought it, because someone cared if he lived or died. Later that evening, Captain Mitchell visited. He brought the translator, a thin German prisoner who had taught English before the war. Mitchell explained the procedure. Local anesthetic, 5 incisions, removing each fragment carefully. The risks were real. Bleeding, infection, nerve damage. You will feel pressure, Mitchell said through the translator, but not sharp pain. If it becomes too much, tell me. We can stop. Henry shook his head. No stop. Take all out. Mitchell studied the boy's face, looking for fear, finding determination instead. Can I keep them? Henry asked. The metal pieces, after. Mitchell was surprised by the request, but he understood it. Those fragments were proof, evidence of survival. Yes, Mitchell said. If you want them, yes. After Mitchell left, Henry lay in the darkness. Other prisoners were sleeping, snoring, coughing, dreaming of home. Henry could not sleep. His mind raced. Tomorrow he would be cut open. Tomorrow he might die on that table. Tomorrow might be the last tomorrow. He thought about writing a letter, a real letter, not the imaginary ones he had been composing in his head for months. But what would he say? Dear mother, I might die tomorrow. An American doctor is trying to save me. The enemy is being kind. I do not understand this war anymore. Dear Anna, I have not forgotten the song you played at Christmas. Brahms, the one that made Father cry. I hear it sometimes in my dreams, in the space between the pain. He did not write the letters. There was no paper, no pen, and even if he wrote them, they might never reach home. The postal system had collapsed. Germany was dying. His family might already be dead, but he held on to his father's broken watch. The metal was warm from his body heat. The hands were frozen at 3:15, the exact moment it had stopped. Henry wondered if his own heart would stop at a specific time tomorrow, if someone would mark the moment, if it would matter to anyone. He decided it would matter to him, so he would fight to keep breathing, keep living, keep carrying the promise he had made. At 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally won. He slept. The surgical tent at 8 in the morning was hot already. Georgia heat settled early and stayed late. Captain Mitchell had prepared everything the night before. Instruments sterilized, bandages ready, the limited supply of Novocaine measured out in careful doses. Corporal Reed was there. So was a German prisoner named Franz Weber. Weber had been a doctor before the war, a surgeon in Munich. Now he was a prisoner who assisted in the camp hospital. Mitchell trusted him. Skill transcended nationality. Henry walked in on his own feet. He was wearing only trousers. His torso was bare. The 5 scars were visible in the morning light, small marks that contained universes of pain. Mitchell had him lie on the table. The metal was cold against Henry's back. He stared at the canvas ceiling of the tent, tried to control his breathing. Mitchell examined each site one final time, palpating, measuring, planning his approach. The first fragment was in the right chest, shallow, perhaps 1 centimeter deep. This would be the easiest. The second and third were in the upper back, between the ribs, deeper, more complicated. The fourth was against the left shoulder blade, surrounded by nerves, dangerous territory. The fifth was the worst, lower back, near the spine, too close to the spinal cord. One wrong move could paralyze this boy for life. Mitchell looked at Reed, at Weber. Ready? They nodded. He looked at Henry. Ready. Henry's voice was steady. Yes. Mitchell injected Novocaine around the first site, waited for it to take effect. Then he made the incision. 3 centimeters, clean, precise. Blood welled up. Reed daubed it away with gauze. Mitchell used forceps to separate the tissue. Muscle, fat, there. The glint of metal, a jagged piece the size of a thumbnail. Serrated edges, the kind that tore through flesh and kept tearing. He grasped it carefully, pulled. It came free. He held it up. First one. Henry was breathing hard, staring at the tent ceiling. How many more? 4. Keep going. The second fragment was deeper. Mitchell had to cut more, separate muscle layers. Henry's hands were clenched into fists. His knuckles were white. Pressure, Mitchell said. You will feel pressure. Pressure was a gentle word for what Henry felt. It was like someone digging in his back with a dull spoon, scraping bone, pulling tissue apart. But it was not the sharp agony of the shrapnel moving inside him, not the grinding pain he had carried for 3 months. This was purposeful. This was leading somewhere. The second piece came out, 3 centimeters long, triangular. The third was right next to it, embedded near a rib. Mitchell had to work carefully. Ribs were brittle. They could crack, pierce a lung. 15 minutes passed. Henry's breathing was ragged. Sweat covered his face. Reed wiped his forehead. You're doing great, kid. Henry did not feel great. He felt like his body was being turned inside out. But he did not ask Mitchell to stop. The fourth fragment was the shoulder, the one that had caused the worst pain, the grinding sensation every time he moved his arm. Mitchell had to go in at an angle. The fragment was lodged against the shoulder blade, surrounded by the brachial plexus, the network of nerves that controlled the entire arm. This will take time, Mitchell said. Stay still. Henry gritted his teeth, tried to become stone, immovable. Mitchell worked slowly, millimeter by millimeter. He could feel the metal under his forceps, could feel the nerves pulsing nearby. One slip in this boy's left arm would be useless. 10 minutes, 15. Franz Weber held Henry's shoulder steady, whispered something in German. Words of encouragement, of strength. Finally, Mitchell had it. He lifted the forceps. The fragment was 4 centimeters long, the largest one yet, wicked sharp on one edge. Almost done, Mitchell said. Henry's voice was barely a whisper. The last one. The last one was the monster, the one near the spine. Mitchell hesitated. He looked at Weber. What do you think? Weber examined the site, pressed carefully. If you leave it, infection will kill him. Maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but it will kill him. And if I damage the nerve, he will be paralyzed but alive. Mitchell looked at Henry. This last one is dangerous, very dangerous. I can leave it. You can live with it, maybe for years. Henry's eyes met his, clear, certain. Take it out. I want all 5 gone. Mitchell nodded, respect in his eyes. All right. He injected more Novocaine, waited, made the incision, longer this time, deeper. The fragment was 4 centimeters down. Right against the vertebra, he could see it now, nestled against bone. The spinal cord was millimeters away. Mitchell's hands were absolutely steady, no tremor, no hesitation. He had done this 1,000 times. Removed metal from men who were screaming, men who were dying, men who had no hope. But this felt different. This boy had survived so much, had carried this metal across an ocean, had held on to life with nothing but will. Mitchell would not let him die now. He used the smallest forceps, grasped the fragment, gently, so gently, pulled. Henry screamed, the first sound of real pain he had made, a sharp cry that cut through the tent. Mitchell did not stop, could not stop. He was committed now. The fragment shifted, moved, came free from the tissue holding it. He lifted it clear of the wound, clear of the spine, clear of the danger. Done, he said. It's done. The tent was silent except for Henry's ragged breathing. Reed was staring. Weber was staring. Mitchell held up the final fragment. 5 pieces of shrapnel on the metal tray. 5 pieces of death that had been inside this boy for 3 months. Henry turned his head, looked at them. Tears ran down his face, not tears of pain, tears of relief, of release. Thank you, he whispered in English. Thank you. Mitchell began closing the wounds. 5 incisions, 5 sets of stitches, bandages wrapped carefully around the torso. When it was finished, Henry looked like he had been in a fight, but it was a fight he had won. Rest now, Mitchell said. Corporal Reed will watch you. Henry was moved to a bed in the hospital ward. He slept for 14 hours straight. No dreams, no nightmares, just deep, empty sleep. When he woke, Reed brought him soup and bread. Henry ate slowly. Everything tasted better, sharper, more real. But not everyone in the camp was celebrating Henry's survival. 3 days after the surgery, other prisoners started appearing at the hospital. A man with a broken finger that had healed crooked. Another with a persistent cough. A third with an infected wound on his leg. Captain Mitchell saw them all. He did not turn anyone away. Word spread. The American doctor would help, would treat, would care. By the end of the week, Mitchell had a waiting list of 30 prisoners. Colonel Harris was furious. I told you this would happen, Harris said. You opened the floodgates. These men need medical attention. We don't have the resources. Then we'll make do. Harris wanted to override him, wanted to shut it down, but he could not without violating Geneva, not without admitting they had been wrong to neglect these men in the first place. Mitchell worked 12-hour days. Reed worked alongside him. Weber became a full-time assistant. Henry became a symbol. To the American staff, he represented mercy, proof that they were better than the enemy. To the other prisoners, he represented something more complicated. Hope, resentment, the uncomfortable reality that their captors could be kind. Henry did not want to be a symbol. He just wanted to heal, to eat, to survive long enough to go home. On April 28th, 6 days after the surgery, Otto Schneider came to the hospital ward. He waited until Reed stepped out. Then he approached Henry's bed. You shame us, Schneider said in German. His voice was cold. Henry looked up. I did not ask for the surgery. They offered. You should have refused, died with honor. Honor will not bring me back to my mother. Schneider's face twisted. There will be consequences. Remember that. He walked away. Henry watched him go. He was not afraid. He had already faced death. An angry officer was nothing compared to shrapnel grinding against his spine. But that night, Sergeant Brennan came to the hospital. It was late, 11 o'clock. Most of the ward was sleeping. Brennan had been drinking. Not enough to be drunk, enough to be dangerous. He stood over Henry's bed. His fists were clenched. Corporal Reed saw him, stepped between them. "Sergeant, step back. Now. Get out of my way, Corporal. I won't let you do this. That Kraut doesn't deserve to live. My brother is dead. He's dead because of them." Henry sat up slowly. His ribs ached. The stitches pulled, but he met Brennan's eyes. "I sorry," Henry said in broken English. "Your brother. I sorry." Brennan stared. He had not expected the German to speak, had not expected an apology. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something worse. Grief, raw and bottomless. He turned and walked out without another word. The next morning, Colonel Harris called Brennan into his office. The sergeant was demoted, restricted to quarters, banned from the hospital area. Harris also called Mitchell in. "You were right, Captain," Harris said. The words cost him, but he said them anyway. "Treating that boy was the right call. Other camps are asking about our procedures. Washington is asking questions." "What are you saying, sir?" "I'm saying you can continue. Medical treatment for all prisoners who need it. We'll requisition more supplies. We'll make it work." Mitchell almost smiled. "Almost. Thank you, sir." In May, Captain Mitchell performed 12 minor surgeries, treated 30 infections, identified 3 cases of tuberculosis that required transfer to civilian hospitals. The camp changed, slowly, quietly, but it changed. And Henry Walker, the boy with 5 pieces of metal inside him, became the reason why. On May 8th, the radio in the camp office crackled to life, an announcement that would change everything. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Henry heard the news in the hospital ward. He was strong enough now to walk, strong enough to work light duties, strong enough to survive. The announcement came through the loudspeakers at noon. Prisoners stopped working. Guards stopped shouting. Everyone listened. The voice on the radio spoke in English. Then a translator repeated it in German. "Unconditional surrender. Adolf Hitler dead. The Third Reich finished. The war in Europe was over." Some prisoners wept. Some stood in silence. Some refused to believe it. Otto Schneider gathered his group of loyalists in the corner of the yard. They spoke in hushed tones, angry tones. They believed Germany had been betrayed from within, stabbed in the back. They refused to accept that it was simply over. Henry felt nothing at first. Then he felt everything all at once. Relief that the killing had stopped. Fear about what came next. Grief for everyone who had died. Confusion about what surrender meant for him. Would he go home when to what? The camp administration had no answers. Nobody knew how long repatriation would take. The infrastructure in Germany was destroyed. The occupation zones were still being organized. It could be months. It could be years. Henry was released from the hospital ward 3 days after the surrender. He was assigned to light duties, kitchen work mostly, cleaning, sweeping, tasks that would not stress his healing wounds. He did not complain. He was alive. He was fed. He was safe. That was more than most of his generation could say. Corporal Reed came to check on him every few days, changing the bandages, making sure the stitches were holding, looking for signs of infection. "How do you feel?" Reed asked one afternoon in late May. Henry's English had improved. He practiced with the other prisoners. "Listened to the guards. Learned. Better," Henry said. "No more pain, just tight. Here." He touched his shoulder. "That's normal. The muscle is healing. Give it time." Henry nodded. Time was all he had now. One evening, Captain Mitchell stopped by the kitchen where Henry was washing dishes. He had not seen the doctor in weeks, not since the follow-up examination. "Henry," Mitchell said, using his first name, not prisoner, not boy. "Henry." "Captain, you're healing well. I'm glad." "Thank you. You saved my life." Mitchell shook his head. "You saved your own life by surviving that long. I just removed the metal." Henry wanted to say more, wanted to express the depth of his gratitude, but he did not have the words, in English or in German. Mitchell seemed to understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. "These are yours," he said. Henry opened the bag. Inside were 5 pieces of shrapnel, cleaned, wrapped in gauze, the fragments that had been inside him for 3 months. "You said you wanted to keep them," Mitchell said. Henry stared at the metal. Each piece was different, jagged, irregular, deadly. He had carried these across Europe, across the Atlantic, across the threshold between life and death. "Thank you," Henry whispered. "What will you do with them?" Henry closed the bag, held it in his hand, felt the weight. "Remember," he said. "Just remember." Mitchell nodded. He understood. The summer passed slowly. The camp population began to decrease as small groups of prisoners were processed and sent back to Europe. The American occupation zone, the British zone, the French zone, not the Soviet zone. Nobody wanted to be sent to the Soviet zone. Henry was not in any of the early groups. He waited, worked, learned more English, wrote letters home that he was not sure would ever be delivered. He wrote to his mother, told her he was alive, told her about the surgery, about Captain Mitchell, about his hope of coming home soon. He wrote to Anna, asked about the piano, asked if she remembered their last Christmas together, asked if she still believed he would keep his promise. He did not know if they were alive to read the letters. The village was in what would become the Soviet zone. Communications were impossible. The mail system had collapsed. Information from the East was scarce and unreliable. But he wrote anyway, because writing the letters meant they were still real, still waiting, still there. In October, Henry saw Sergeant Brennan across the camp yard. The sergeant had been reinstated after his demotion. He was supervising a work detail. Their eyes met briefly. Brennan looked away first. Henry felt no anger, no resentment. Brennan had lost someone he loved. Grief made people do terrible things. Henry understood that now. The leaves changed color. The Georgia heat gave way to cooler autumn air. Henry celebrated his 20th birthday in the camp. Nobody knew it was his birthday. He did not tell anyone. He just marked the passage of time in his head. 1 more year survived. In December, the first snow fell in Georgia. It was nothing like the snow in Germany. Light, brief, gone by afternoon. But it reminded Henry of home, of frozen fields, of the foxhole where he had nearly died. He touched the scars on his chest. They were healed now, pink and smooth. He barely felt them anymore, but they were there, permanent, proof. In January 1946, almost a full year after he had been wounded, Henry's name appeared on a repatriation list. He was going home. The announcement came on a cold morning. 40 prisoners called to the administration office. Henry was number 17 on the list. They would leave in 2 weeks. Train to New York. Shipped to Europe. Processing in Bremen. Then release. Henry felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. He was going home. But home no longer existed. Not the way he remembered it. Germany was defeated, occupied, divided. The country had been broken into pieces just like the shrapnel had broken into his body and his family. Where were they? Were they alive? He had received no letters, no responses, no confirmation that anyone was waiting. But he had to go, had to try, had to keep the promise he had made. On his last day in the camp, Captain Mitchell came to see him. He brought an envelope. "This is for you," Mitchell said. Inside was a medical report, written in both English and German, documenting the surgery, the dates, the procedures, the successful removal of 5 shrapnel fragments. "Keep this," Mitchell said. "You might need it someday. Proof of what happened." Henry took the report, folded it carefully, put it in his pocket next to the cloth bag containing the metal fragments. "Thank you," Henry said. His English was fluent now, nearly accent-free. "You saved my life. I never forget." Mitchell extended his hand. Henry shook it. 2 men from opposite sides of a war, connected by an act of mercy. "Go home, Henry," Mitchell said. "Live a good life. That's how you thank me." Henry nodded. He could not speak. The emotion was too much. The next morning he boarded a truck with 39 other prisoners. The camp gates opened. The truck drove through. Henry looked back once, saw Captain and Mitchell standing near the administration building, watching. Mitchell raised his hand, a small wave, a final goodbye. Henry waved back. Then the camp disappeared behind him. That chapter of his life closed. Another one was beginning. The journey back to Europe took 3 weeks. The ship was less crowded this time. The men were healthier. The mood was different. Not the desperation of prisoners being transported, the uncertain hope of men going home. Henry stood on the deck as the ship entered Bremen Harbor in February 1946. The city was ruins, buildings reduced to rubble, cranes working, people moving through the destruction like ants through a broken nest. This was Germany now. This was what he was returning to. The processing camp was efficient. 3 days of paperwork, medical examinations, interrogations to identify war criminals. Henry was cleared quickly. He had been infantry, low rank, 19 years old, no crimes, no charges. They gave him a small amount of money, Deutsche Marks that were barely worth the paper they were printed on. They gave him civilian clothes, a worn jacket, trousers, shoes with holes in the soles. They gave him papers, identification, release documents, permission to travel. Then they opened the gates and told him to go. Henry stood outside the camp. Free. For the first time in over a year, he was not a prisoner, not a soldier, not a patient, just Henry Walker, 20 years old, trying to find his way home. He caught a train heading east, toward his village, toward the Soviet occupation zone. The train was packed with refugees, displaced persons, former prisoners, everyone trying to get somewhere, trying to find someone. The journey took 2 days. The train stopped frequently, sometimes for hours. The rails were damaged. The stations were destroyed. Everything moved slowly in this broken country. Henry watched the landscape pass. He barely recognized it. Villages he had known were gone. Forests had been cut down for fuel. Fields were cratered from bombs. This was not the Germany he had left. He arrived at the town nearest his village in early March 1946. From there he walked, 5 kilometers through mud and melting snow, carrying nothing but his papers, the medical report, and the cloth bag with the shrapnel. The village appeared in the distance. Some buildings still stood. Others were rubble. The church steeple was gone. The school where his mother had taught was a shell. Henry walked down the main street. A few people were outside. They stared at him. He did not recognize any of them. He reached his house, the timber structure his father had built. It was still standing. But when he approached the door, he could hear voices inside, unfamiliar voices. He knocked. An old woman opened the door. She looked at him with suspicion. "Yes, I am Henry Walker," he said in German. "This is my house. I lived here." The woman's face softened slightly. "The Walker family is gone. We moved in last year. The house was empty." Gone where? West, ahead of the Russians, January 1945. Henry felt the ground shift beneath him. January 1945. That was when he had been wounded, when the shrapnel had entered his body. His family had been fleeing at the exact moment he had been fighting. "Do you know where they went?" "No, I'm sorry." Henry stood there, staring at the door to his childhood home, the door he could not enter, the life he could not reclaim. "Is there anyone who might know?" he asked. The woman thought, "Try Mrs. Hoffman, 3 houses down. She knew everyone." Henry thanked her, walked to Mrs. Hoffman's house, knocked. An ancient woman answered. She was 80 at least, bent, fragile, but her eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Hoffman," Henry said, "I am Henry Walker, Margaret's son." Recognition flashed across her face. "Henry, we thought you were dead." "I was a prisoner in America. I just came back." "America? My God!" "My mother, my sister Anna. Where did they go?" Mrs. Hoffman's face fell. "They left in January 1945. The Russians were coming. Your mother was afraid. She took Anna and fled west. I do not know where," she did not say. Or maybe she did not know. Nothing, no word. "Nothing, I'm sorry, child." Henry felt something break inside him. He had survived the war, survived the shrapnel, survived the surgery, survived everything. To come home to nothing, to no one. "Thank you," he managed to say. He walked away and out of the village back toward the train station. He could not stay here. There was nothing left. He would go west, into the American or British zones. He would search, he would find them, he had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. The search took 7 months. Henry traveled from refugee camp to refugee camp, from displaced persons center to displaced persons center, across Bavaria, across the American occupation zone, showing papers, asking questions, looking at lists. Margaret Walker, Anna Walker, from a village in the east, fled in January 1945. No one had seen them, no one knew them. The lists were incomplete, chaotic. Millions of people were displaced. Record keeping was impossible. Henry worked when he could. Manual labor, clearing rubble, building temporary shelters, earning enough money for food and train fare, sleeping in shelters, in abandoned buildings, anywhere he could find space. He carried the cloth bag with the shrapnel, the medical report, his father's broken watch. These were his only possessions, his only proof that he had existed, that his family had existed. In October 1946, he arrived at a large refugee camp near Munich. Thousands of people living in tents and temporary barracks, waiting for resettlement, waiting for news, waiting for hope. Henry went to the administration office, asked the same questions he had asked 100 times before. Margaret Walker, Anna Walker. The clerk checked the records, flipped through pages, stopped. Walker, yes, there were 2 women registered here. Arrived in March 1945. Henry's heart stopped. Where? He asked. His voice was shaking. Sector C, Barracks 14. Henry ran through the muddy paths between the barracks, past hundreds of people, past cook fires and laundry lines and children playing in the dirt. Barracks 14, a long wooden structure, windows covered with a cloth, smoke coming from a chimney. He burst through the door, 20 people inside, families, single women, children, all staring at him. He scanned the faces, looking, searching, and then he saw her. Anna. She was sitting on a bunk near the back, thinner than he remembered. Her hair was shorter, her face was older. But it was her. She looked up, saw him. For 5 seconds she did not react, did not recognize him. Then her eyes went wide. Henry! Her voice was a whisper, disbelief, shock. Anna! She stood up, took a step toward him, then another, then she was running, crashing into him, wrapping her arms around him, sobbing. Henry held her, his sister, the person he had been searching for, the person he thought he might never find. They stood there, holding each other, both of them crying, neither able to speak. Finally, Anna pulled back, looked at his face, touched his cheek like she was checking if he was real. You're alive, she said. You're alive. Yes, I'm alive. We thought, everyone said. We thought you were dead. I was a prisoner in America. I just came back. America, Henry, oh my God. She hugged him again, tighter this time. Then Henry asked the question he was afraid to ask. Where's Mother? Anna went still, her arms loosened. She stepped back. The look on her face told him everything. No, Henry said. No, Anna's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Henry, I'm so sorry. When July, this year, tuberculosis, there was no medicine. We tried everything. Henry felt his legs weaken. He sat down on the edge of the bunk. Anna sat next to him. She talked about you, Anna said quietly, every day. She never gave up hope. She said you would come back. She said you always kept your promises. Henry could not speak, could not breathe. He had survived everything, fought through everything to come home, to see his mother again, to show her he had kept his promise. But he was 3 months too late. 3 months. If he had come back in April, in May, in June, she would have been alive. But he had been in Georgia, healing, working, waiting for repatriation, and she had been dying here, waiting for him. She didn't suffer at the end, Anna said. She just got weaker. And then one morning she didn't wake up. We buried her in the camp cemetery. There's a marker. I can show you. Henry nodded. He could not trust himself to speak. They sat in silence. Brother and sister, the only family either of them had left. Tell me what happened to you, Anna finally said. Tell me everything. So Henry told her about the battlefield, the shrapnel, the medic who told him to walk, the capture, the journey to America, the camp in Georgia, Captain Mitchell, the surgery, the 5 pieces of metal that had been inside him for 3 months. He pulled out the cloth bag, showed her the fragments. "These were in you?" Anna asked, horror in her voice. "Yes." "My God, Henry." He told her about the recovery, the wait, the journey home, the search. When he finished, Anna was quiet for a long time. "Mother would have been proud," she said. "You survived. Against everything. You survived. I promised I would come back. You did. You kept your promise. But I was too late." Anna took his hand. "You're here now. That's what matters. We're here. Together." Henry looked at his sister. She was 20 now. No longer the 16-year-old girl who had played piano on that last Christmas. The war had aged her just as it had aged him. She had survived her own war, her own journey, her own grief. They were all that was left of the Walker family. But they were alive, and that was something. Henry and Anna left the refugee camp in early 1947. They found a small apartment in Munich. 2 rooms, cold water, shared bathroom down the hall. But it was theirs. Henry found work as a laborer, then as an apprentice mechanic. The skills came back quickly. His father's lessons, the patience, the precision, the ability to fix things that were broken. Anna got a job as a teacher's assistant. She was good with children, patient, kind, like their mother had been. They did not talk much about the war, about what they had lost. It was easier to focus on the present, on survival, on the small victories of each day. In 1952, Henry married a woman named Elizabeth, a widow whose first husband had died in the war. She had no children. She wanted a quiet life. Henry could give her that. They had 3 children over the next 7 years. 2 boys, 1 girl. Henry taught them to build things, to fix things. He never taught them about war. Anna married in 1954. A school teacher, a gentle man who played violin. They had 2 children. She taught them piano, the music she had played for their father all those years ago. Henry worked as a mechanic for 30 years. He was good at it, reliable, quiet. He did not talk about his past, did not tell his co-workers about the shrapnel, about the American doctor, about the promise he had failed to keep. He kept the cloth bag in a drawer, the 5 fragments, the medical report from Captain Mitchell, his father's broken watch. These were his secrets, his private history. Sometimes late at night he would take them out, hold the metal pieces in his hand, feel their weight. Remember, his children found the scars once, asked about them. Henry told them they were from the war, nothing more. They did not ask again. In 1984, a local historian came to Henry's door. He was researching German prisoners of war in the United States. He had found Henry's name in military records. He wanted to interview him. Henry was 58, retired, his children were grown. Elizabeth was still alive, still patient with his silences. He agreed to the interview. Once. Only once. The historian asked questions. Henry answered them, briefly, factually, without emotion. Yes, he had been wounded. Yes, he had carried shrapnel for 3 months. Yes, an American doctor had saved his life. Yes, he still had the fragments. He showed the historian the cloth bag. Let him photograph the pieces. Let him copy the medical report. When the interview was over, the historian asked one final question. "How do you feel about what happened? About the doctor who saved you?" Henry thought for a long time. "He gave me a chance," Henry finally said. "To come home, to find my sister, to live. I am grateful." Do you ever think about him? Wonder what happened to him every day? Did you ever try to contact him? No. Why not? Henry did not have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but could not put it into words. How do you thank someone for your life? What words are big enough? What gesture is sufficient? Silence was easier. Silence was safer. The past is past, Henry said. I prefer to leave it there. The historian published his research in a small regional journal, a few pages about German POWs in American camps. Henry's story was a footnote, a brief anecdote about unusual medical treatment. Almost no one read it. Henry died in 1998, 2 years after Elizabeth. He was 72. He passed quietly in his sleep. His heart simply stopped. His children cleared out his apartment, found the usual things: clothes, books, photographs, kitchen items, and in the bottom drawer of his desk, they found the cloth bag, the medical report, the broken watch. They did not know what they were looking at. Anna was still alive. She was 71. She came to the apartment, saw the items, explained. "These were from the war," she said. "These were inside him. An American doctor took them out." Henry's children stared. They had never known, never asked, never imagined. "What should we do with them?" Henry's oldest son asked. Anna thought, "Give them to a museum. Let them tell his story. He wouldn't tell it himself, but maybe it should be told." In 1999, the items were donated to a small regional museum in Bavaria. The military history section, World War II artifacts. They were placed in a glass case. 5 pieces of shrapnel, a medical report, a pocket watch with hands frozen at 3:15. There was a placard, brief, factual. Henry Walker, 1926 to 1998, German soldier, wounded January 1945. Prisoner of war in the United States, treated by American military surgeon, survived, returned to Germany, 1946. Father, mechanic, citizen. It did not mention the fear, the pain, the 3-month journey with metal inside him, the kindness of Corporal Reed, the skill of Captain Mitchell, the impossible decision to operate on an enemy, the ripple effects that changed a camp, the search for family, the grief of arriving too late. It did not mention any of that. It just said he was a soldier, a prisoner, a survivor. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes people stopped at the case, looked at the shrapnel, read the placard, moved on. But occasionally someone would pause, would really look, would see beyond the metal and the dates in the brief description, would see a boy who should have died but didn't, a doctor who chose mercy over efficiency, a family torn apart and partially reunited, a life lived quietly in the shadow of war, would see the complexity, the humanity, the small triumph of compassion over hatred, and those people would remember, not forever, but for a moment, and a moment was something. In 2003, Anna died. She was 76, peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were to her daughter, "Make sure you play piano for your children, like I played for your Uncle Henry." Music is how we remember. Among Anna's belongings, her children found a box of letters, old, yellowed, never sent. Letters from Henry, written in 1945, from the camp in Georgia, addressed to Margaret Walker, to Anna Walker, care of their village address. The letters had never been delivered. The postal system had collapsed. Germany had been divided, the mail had stopped. But Henry had written them anyway. Sitting in a hospital bed in rural Georgia, telling his mother he was alive, telling Anna he remembered, promising he would come home. Margaret Walker had died in July 1946, 3 months before Henry found Anna. She never knew her son had survived, never received word, never got the letters. She had waited, hoped, believed, and died believing he was gone. Anna's daughter kept the letters, put them with the museum donation. Let the story be complete. One of the letters was displayed next to the shrapnel, in Henry's handwriting, the German carefully formed, the sentiment clear. "Dear Mother, I am alive. An American doctor saved me. I will come home. Wait for me. I love you. Henry." Margaret Walker never read it, but now everyone could, and in a small museum in Bavaria the story lived on. Incomplete, imperfect, but true. A boy with metal inside him, a doctor who chose mercy, a family divided by war and partially healed by peace, a life that should have ended in a frozen foxhole, but instead lasted 72 years. 5 pieces of shrapnel in a glass case. Proof that sometimes kindness wins. Sometimes humanity transcends hatred. Sometimes the enemy becomes the savior. Sometimes the fragments we carry become the foundation of who we become. And sometimes that is enough.